Hello, this is a brief overview of the trial and appeals process for felony cases in our North Carolina courts. This particular hypothetical case involves a charge of burglary. This video is purely educational and is not to be considered as legal advice. So let's get started. The police believe that Jane has committed the felony of burglary. First, a police officer generally will ask a judicial official, most often a magistrate, to issue a warrant for Jane's arrest, charging her with the crime of burglary. To issue that warrant, the judicial official must find probable cause to believe that Jane committed the crime. A finding of probable cause requires only that the evidence presented to the judicial official gives him or her a reasonable belief that the crime occurred and that the suspect committed it. After Jane is arrested, she probably will have several court appearances before a magistrate or a district court judge for the preliminary stages of her case. North Carolina's least serious felonies can end with a plea of guilty in district court. But if Jane wants to plead not guilty and have a trial, or if she is charged with a more serious felony, the case must proceed to Superior Court. Typically, the state must obtain a document called a bill of indictment from a grand jury to get a felony to Superior Court. A grand jury is a special jury of citizens who hear evidence and decide whether or not there is probable cause to charge a defendant with a crime, much like the magistrate did earlier in the case when issuing the warrant for arrest. The bill of indictment is the grand jury's formal accusation that Jane committed the crime. As an alternative to indictment, Jane might give her consent for the state to try her in Superior Court on a document called an information. Once that formal accusation is filed, whether as an indictment or an information, Jane either will plead guilty to an offense or she will plead not guilty and be tried for it. The trial typically will occur in front of a jury, but North Carolina allows some felonies to be tried before only a judge who will hear all the evidence and render a verdict in the same way a jury would. Although it required only probable cause to charge Jane with burglary in order to convict her, the jury or judge must find beyond a reasonable doubt that she committed the crime. If Jane is convicted, whether that occurs after a trial or after a plea of guilty, and she believes a legal error occurred in her trial or in the court's judgment, she can appeal to the court's appellate division, which includes the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. Almost all criminal appeals go to the Court of Appeals, but an appeal for a capital crime that results in the death penalty goes directly to the Supreme Court. The state can appeal as well, but the state's right to appeal is much more restricted than Jane's and is limited to specific legal issues. In the appellate division, the Court of Appeals and Supreme Court do not retry the case and hear evidence like the Superior Court did. The appellate courts only review the legal procedures applied over the course of the case to determine whether or not there were any errors in those procedures or in the judge's interpretation of the law. If the case goes to the Court of Appeals and either Jane or the state believes the Court of Appeals decision was legally incorrect, they might be able to appeal further to the Supreme Court of North Carolina to review the Court of Appeals decision. If either party believes that the Supreme Court itself has made errors, they might appeal further to the United States Supreme Court, but appeals to the U.S. Supreme Court generally are limited to issues set out in the U.S. Constitution. So most criminal appeals are resolved entirely within North Carolina's courts. The Court of Appeals or Supreme Court might find that there were no errors in the previous stages of the case, in which case the original outcome is allowed to stand. This typically is called upholding or affirming the trial court's outcome. If the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court finds errors in how the case proceeded, they might return the case to one of the trial courts to correct those errors. The correction might be something as simple as fixing a clerical error on a document, or it might be as extensive as retrying the entire case or dismissing the charges entirely. This process of returning to the lower courts to correct errors might result in additional appeals that claim new errors occurred, and in rare cases, that process occurs multiple times. But a case typically will end once the trial court has entered a final judgment from which neither side appeals. Thanks for watching. Connect with us on Facebook and Twitter at NC Courts.